At lunch yesterday, we had a fascinating conversation about George Washington, and you have a particularly keen interest on an aspect of George Washington's life that a lot of people overlook because they're always interested in the general, the revolution, and the Constitutional Convention, and the presidency. Why don't you talk about your project on George Washington and what you think of his formation as a person, as a leader?
Great, thanks, Lee. It's great to be here. It's probably the only Rhodes Scholar I ever thought I would make, and I've made it. So we'll see what roads I'm on. Washington is a fascinating figure. I do this thing where I go around to schools now and visit with them, and I do some teacher education programs. The very first thing I do is I ask them to tell me what they imagine about George, what they picture about George Washington. How do they picture him? And I say, well, I ask them that, and then I've tested myself, and I'm almost universally right. The images of Washington are always one of several things. Mount Rushmore, the $quarter bill, man on a horseback with a sword, crossing the Delaware, and then my personal favorite that always comes out, particularly with students, is wooden teeth. So I have a PowerPoint slide where I pop it up then showing that I've guessed it all. And that's the caricature of Washington. And it's partly, frankly, his fault because he was unapproachable in life. He didn't write an autobiography. He was not very introspective in his writing. And wasn't introspective in his speaking to people either. I think it's so easy to come to grips with Lincoln because he's so flawed. He shows his flaws, and he's almost unashamed of them. Where Washington never wanted to show a flaw, and kept people sort of at a distance. So we have this caricature of Washington, and it's enhanced by the biographies of Washington that focus on his greatness. His greatness as president, as general of the Revolutionary War, as the leader of the Constitutional Convention, the chair of the Constitutional Convention. It's really astounding what he accomplished, and so almost every biography focuses on that, and it's understandable. But what I've discovered, almost by accident, is the young Washington, the Washington in formation. And that's a Washington that I think the beauty is we can get to know him. We can approach him. You know, the Mount Rushmore guy is unapproachable. We're looking up at the marble, and he's cold and distant. But there was a young Washington, red-haired, adventure seeker, ambitious, really interesting character. And the reason I want to tell this story is because it's a way, particularly for young people, that can approach this guy for the first time. He's not the old, perfect marble guy with no emotions. It's the guy whose every emotion that courses through our veins course through his. It's the guy who overcame a lot of that, and that's a key lesson. He was ambitious. One of the lessons I think he had to learn was he'd pick up when he was young, he'd fight every fight that came along, and he had to learn not to do that, and that was really key to us winning the revolution, frankly. And so I think that's one of the reasons I want to tell the story, is because it is so exciting and so few people know about it. It starts, when he is a young buck in 1753. He's 21 years old and essentially college age. But he didn't go to college. His brother went to college. In those days of primogeniture, Brother Lawrence got everything. He was the younger brother, and the older brother was sent off to college. So Washington had to make his own way in the world. He had to make his own place in the world. That's important understanding him too, is he was ambitious to make a place for himself, make a name for himself. So he started in 1753. It starts out with Governor Dinwiddie sending out a call for somebody to go into the Ohio country. Very dangerous, very few white people living there. Somebody had to go to the Ohio country, negotiate with Indians, cross the mountains, make it to Fort LeBoeuf, into the enemy-held territory, deliver a message telling them to leave, and then get out alive. There have been a lot of people out there in the wilderness. None of them wanted to do it. None of the people with any military experience wanted to do it. So this young buck with no military experience, 21-year-old kid, steps up and he and takes Governor Dinwiddie's challenge. And the great thing I think about it is, the great image you could have of this is that Governor Dinwiddie met with him, and he called him nothing but a raw laddie. So think about George Washington, nothing but a raw laddie. But he sends the raw laddie, even though he has no real confidence that he'll make it back, I think, sends him out with on this mission. And the mission is, he had to cross the mountains in the dead of winter. He leaves in October 1753. He had to cross these mountains. He had horses that couldn't make it through the snow drifts. He had to be left behind. He makes it across. He negotiates with Native Americans. He's given the Indian nickname Indian name Kanatacarius, which is really wonderful, I think, to remember. Kanatacarius, and it was actually his great grandfather's name. It means town dweller, or town taker, or devourer of villages. And so they give it to his great grandson George, this kid. He makes it to Fort LaBeouf. You imagine him after 6 weeks or so stumbling out of the wilderness at Fort LaBeouf, and what the French must have thought of this young red-haired punk with some Native Americans beside him, and he delivers the message, get out, go back to Canada. And they don't treat him seriously. They take him in, though, because he's not a threat. Little do they know. They take him in and feed him, give him wine, give him food. But then Washington does, and kids love to hear this part of the story, I think. He knows they're not leaving at this point, but what he does then is become a spy. Now this is George Washington, not only the outdoor backwoods adventurer, but the spy. And so he spies on the French. He counts the cannons, he counts the guns, he counts the canoes. He listens to conversations, which is a little troublesome because he didn't speak French. But he has a translator, an Indian with him, Tanacarisan, or the Half King, that translates. So he spies on them. They let him out in January. I think it's January of 1754. Then they tell him he decides to leave, and here again, the dead of winter. Now we're in Erie, Pennsylvania. And if anybody's ever been to Erie, Pennsylvania in January, you do not want to be out in this wilderness. You certainly don't want to be out in 1754 with no car, with no coverage, with no place to stay. And what happened was what you might expect. His men started getting frostbite. You can't find food out here in the wilderness, so they start to starve. And he has to eventually leave bunches of them behind. And almost everybody, in fact, everybody but 2 people. And he tells all the rest of his men, he says, go live in some Indian villages, stay here, winter out, come back in the spring. But he said, I've got a mission. He's on a mission. He has valuable information for Governor Dinwiddie and the British. And so he heads off with Christopher Gist, his guide. Just the 2 of them. And this becomes an incredible adventure. The greatest story, I think, of it is when he reaches the Allegheny River. Now, it's just the 2 of them. The horses are starving. The horses, he has to leave them behind. He's on foot. He trades his clothes for Indian moccasins and Indian buckskin because he knows they'll be better to survive. I love that image of Washington, not the perfectly pressed blue buff uniform, but in buckskin out in the wilderness. He gets to the Allegheny River, and they expect it. It's so cold, they expect it to be frozen over. When they get there, it's not frozen over. So here's the 2 of them. They got to cross the river. What do? Well, they have one hatchet between the 2 of them, so they start to fell trees. They start cutting down small trees. They lash the small trees together to a raft. They start going across. Now this is the picture of the washing across the Delaware. All those big ice chunks aren't really real, but there were ice chunks in the Allegheny at the time, and so they hit an ice chunk and they dump into the Allegheny River. This is January, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania now, and they are in over their head in water.